You know that classic sci-fi trope, right? The lonely hero falls in love with their AI assistant. We've all seen it. But is that slowly becoming our reality? Well, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating study from the AI company Anthropic that gives us a first real look at the data.
So let's just jump right in with the big question. Is the movie Her basically our collective future? Are millions of us secretly pouring our hearts out to chatbots? It's a pretty powerful idea, but let's see what the data actually says.
Because this isn't just speculation. Anthropic went and analyzed 4.5 million conversations with their AI, Claude, to find out what's really going on. And they used a special privacy-preserving tool to see the broad patterns of how we're using these AIs for our emotional and personal needs.
Okay, so first things first. Just how widespread is this whole thing? I mean, are AI therapy sessions and digital friendships becoming the new normal? Let's take a look at the numbers.
The answer is probably not what you think. The key number here is 2.9%. That's the tiny fraction of conversations with Claude that the researchers classified as affective, which is just a fancy way of saying chats that are driven by our emotional or psychological needs.
And to put that into perspective, the vast majority of people are using AI for stuff like work, coding, and writing content. So these deeper, more personal conversations, they are happening, but they're a pretty small, though definitely significant, piece of the pie. Now this is where it gets really interesting, how that little 2.9% breaks down. As you can see here, most of it is for pretty practical things, like getting interpersonal advice or some coaching. And what about that deep companionship or romantic roleplay? Well, that makes up less than 0.5% of all conversations. So yeah, the whole Her scenario is still very much the exception, not the rule.
Okay, so for that small group of users who are having these conversations, what are they actually talking about?
Well, the range is, honestly, it's surprisingly broad and deeply human. People are bringing just about everything to Claude, from the practical stuff like trying to figure out their next career move, all the way to the profoundly personal. They're talking about relationship troubles, anxiety, and even exploring these huge existential questions about meaning and consciousness. Some are even using it to help process psychological trauma.
And this quote right here really highlights a core finding from the study. When people do seek out companionship from the AI, it's often because they're wrestling with some of the heaviest emotional challenges we face as humans, like deep-seated loneliness or that feeling of existential dread.
All of this brings up a really critical question. How does the AI even handle these sensitive topics? Is it just a passive listener that agrees with everything, or does it actually have boundaries? Let's explore this idea of AI pushback.
So what is pushback? Basically, it's any time the AI resists what a user is saying or asking for. This could mean refusing a dangerous request, questioning a harmful belief, or maybe challenging some negative self-talk. It's a really key mechanism for making sure the AI is safe and helpful.
So how often does this happen in these kinds of supportive chats? Almost never. The study found that less than 10% of counseling or coaching conversations had any kind of pushback from Claude. It's incredibly rare.
And this slide gives you some really clear examples. On the left, you see when Claude will push back on things that are obvious safety violations, like giving out dangerous weight loss advice or supporting self-harm. But on the right, for general chats about anxiety, personal growth, or workplace stress, it's pretty much a non-judgmental, supportive partner.
And this all leads to a really fascinating dilemma. On one hand, having so little pushback can reduce the stigma around talking about mental health. But on the other hand, does this kind of endless empathy set completely unrealistic expectations for our very human, and let's face it, very imperfect relationships? It's a huge question the researchers raised.
So we know the AI is mostly empathetic, but does it actually help? I mean, do people leave these conversations feeling any better than when they started? Let's look at the emotional journey of these chats.
The data seems to suggest a positive shift. As you can see in this chart, the researchers measured the emotional sentiment of the user's language, and they found that, on average, conversations involving coaching, counseling, and companionship tended to end on a more positive note. See that higher bar on the right than when they began. But, and this is a really important but, we have to be careful here. This does not prove any kind of lasting psychological benefit. It only measures the words people use within a single chat. It's a good sign that the AI isn't making things worse, but it's not the same thing as a real clinical outcome.
Okay, so after looking at all the data, what have we actually learned? And where do we even go from here? Let's wrap this all up with the key takeaways and the big questions that are still out there.
All right, to sum it all up, these emotional support chats are a small slice of AI use, but they cover a huge range of deep human experiences. The AI is generally really supportive and non-judgmental, and these chats tend to finish on a more positive note.
But the most crucial point is what we don't know yet. This study couldn't measure the risk of emotional dependency or the long-term effects on our real-world relationships. And just think, as AI evolves with voice and video, these interactions could become even more intense. We are just at the very beginning of understanding all of this.
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question. An AI doesn't get tired, it doesn't get distracted or have a bad day. It can offer this flawless, endless empathy. As we get more and more used to that, what are we going to start expecting from our friends, our partners, and even from ourselves? That's the emotional frontier we're just now beginning to explore.